What comes to mind when you think about learning history? Musty libraries, rote learning of dates, place names that are hard to pronounce, photos of old men with beards, falling asleep in class? That last photo could have been me in the fifth grade. I'm Jack Arnold, and I became a fan of ancient and modern history. A couple of years ago, I met Doyle Glass, an author who specializes in writing stories about historical events. He has published two books about Vietnam and is working on a third book about a World War II spy named Robert Benoit. Here's a recent conversation I had with Mr. Glass about different ways of bringing life and interest to history. So I'm here today with Doyle Glass, who has written two excellent books on Vietnam, and both of these books are coming out in re-release with some updated information, new covers. They should be available by May or June of this year. So Doyle, we've been talking a little bit about historical fiction, historical nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, creative nonfiction, a lot of different terms about what it is that you do. And I wonder if you could unpack this a little bit for us. First of all, is the difference between these different types of writing?
Jack, that's a great question. The two books about the Vietnam War are nonfiction. Those were taken from, I literally spent a number of years interviewing the veterans that served in the two operations that are portrayed in the two books. So the words in those books came from the guys that were there. The current work that I'm working on, it would fall into the category of what I would call creative nonfiction, meaning the nonfiction piece of it is the historical data, times, dates, people, location. The creative part comes into what I do as a writer, which is to put lifeblood breathing into those people. Obviously, in the case of Benoit's War, the book I'm working on now, that's World War II, the characters are no longer living. There are some assumptions that have to be made, and that's where the creative part comes in. So things like historical fiction are fiction based back in time with facts, depending on the writer, that are real, but everything else kind of created, the storyline, the characters, etc. My case, once again, I say creative nonfiction because the characters, the times, locations were all real. Robert Benoit, a real person, and the people that he was with. So that, hopefully that answers your question, kind of shows the distinction between the two.
Let's stick with the Vietnam books, first of all. You've had a lot of sources you've been able to use to create the content for those books. What have you learned about just the process of interviewing people as you do this? What are some techniques that you have found useful?
Well, the main one that I would say with both Swift Sword and Lions of Medina, when I'm speaking with a veteran or a family member of someone who was killed or no longer living, is I try to get at their emotions, what they thought, what it was like in the moment. I remember one veteran from Swift Sword, Carlton Clark, who in the middle of the firefight, after I believe he was wounded, he rolled over, looked up in a cloud and spoke to God. And that's something that was very personal to him. God telling him to get through it, to, that sort of thing. So to answer your question, I would say the people don't know what it was really like. Can you tell me from your perspective what it was like in all aspects? So that would be the main thing. And of course, that can be very difficult for individuals to relive that, and for family members to relive a loss. So that can be a very hard question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think that it would take an emotional toll, not just on them, but on you as well, hearing some of these stories. And
it did. Both books, I interviewed a number of guys, and a lot of those guys had not spoken to each other. And then, of course, I bring up the family members. I spoke to the father of William Perkins, who was a Medal of Honor recipient on Operation Medina, and he has since passed away. But that was very emotional because he was tapping into emotions 45 years earlier. So as a writer, you do have to distance yourself a little bit, but it was a lot. I'm not going to lie, it was a lot. But what I'm proud of is that I got their story, the reality from their mouths, their experience, and it's part of history.